Thanks for staying with us. We still have with us Ugo Dre, and we're still discussing Nigeria's economy. BC, go ahead, please.
Yes, so I like the fact that you mentioned and reminded us that all over the world, these issues are happening. Inflation is really high. And we've traveled in recent times, and we've tried to buy products that we usually would have bought at different prices. And everybody's complaining that these prices are very high all over the world. But do you think our own problem, or why it's hitting us harder, is because there's still a lot of wastefulness going around, especially in government quarters? We see how these budgets are being done. We see the priorities of the budgets. We see some of the things that we should have cut out that is not needed still being expended on. And do you think if we find a way to cut down on those, maybe we wouldn't need to borrow so much? Maybe the inflation would be as high as it is compared to other countries?
Good question. There are, of course, various waste that we see in our budget today, not just the current budget, which is about 49.7 trillion record budget. Previous budgets as well, we've seen huge numbers that we all think maybe can be leaner. But if you look at it from the other side, to sort of flip it, they're actually the budget, like as percentage of GDP or compared to other countries, is actually quite small, or as a percentage of our population is actually quite small. But of course, the issue then is affordability. I mean, you can want a bigger budget, but can you afford it? So to your point, which is, are we properly implementing the budget and spending on the right things? I think if you go back and look at the data, the answer is that you're sounding no, right? I think that there could have been better use of a budget. Over the last few years, we've seen recurrent expenditure top capital expenditure in budget. And then even capital expenditure in budget is nowhere close to 100% implementation. So for example, if we say, oh, we're budgeting 10 trillion in capital expenditure, we probably just spend 7. But if we say we're spending 12 trillion in recurrent expenditure, we will spend the 12 trillion. Right? So, and capital expenditure, is really what drives economic growth. And it's now worse because based on the current budget, we are now spending more on debt servicing compared to capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure. So there could be better ways of implementing this budget that could alleviate some of the pain that we're seeing. So for example, if a lot of your capital spend is going on very good and efficient roads, proper infrastructure like rail and some of these things, I think you would see inflation come down a lot more. But more than anything else, what is probably driving inflation is even some of this ease of doing business challenges, whether it's you trying to clear your goods at the customs, or you're trying to export, the kind of corruption you face there, or what you meet on checkpoints down the line because you're trying to move goods from one part of the country to the other, or you're a farmer and you've just produced your goods and then half of your goods is spoiled because you don't have better storage system, or you can't transport your goods from one part of the country to the other. These are all the structural issues that actually affect inflation more than the budget.
Okay, I wanted to come to the futuristic part of this conversation, because what we've heard, especially when this administration came in, was that I need about 1 year, 2 years for things to stabilize. We need to make some hard decisions. It's going to be painful. These policies, you not begin to see the benefits until about 18 months and above. Don't worry, by 2020, in the next few years, you will see the difference. Do you agree with them? And do you think that the decisions that we made in the last 1 year was necessary? Even though, yes, we've agreed that it could have been done better. Yes. But were they necessary? And indeed, are we going to see some light at the end of the tunnel? Are we going to see some benefits of these policies in the coming year or so?
100%. I think they were necessary. And not because, some people intentionally wanted to do what was necessary. But it was necessary because there was no choice. There's really nothing else they could do. That's what they had to do. And so it should lead to a much better economy over the next few years. I'm actually very bullish this year. I think that we would see inflation drop this year to a large extent, not necessarily because the structural issues have been taken off, but because you won't see all those, jumps that we saw last year, they're not going to happen this year. I think exchange rate will be fairly stable this year as well. I think businesses will have a lot more. I think there will be a lot more capital flows into Nigeria this year. So if you put all those things into consideration and some of the capital projects that they're also doing, I think as much as government still has their issues, we're actually seeing them execute better, right? I mean, if you recently visited Abuja, as much as you probably might not like the person in charge of that town, there are roads, there are infrastructure projects going on. And if you live here in Lagos as well, there are around. So you tend to feel like there is some sense of optimism that you could see a semblance of an improving economy. Now, but whether we get back to the OBJ type economy is a different thing. It's still going to take a whole lot of work to do. And my fear is that if they don't achieve a lot this year, then it might be difficult because from next year you're not gradually entering election season.
Everything shuts down.
I
was going to ask that recently the president, I think there was an article, I think it was the president saying we're no longer servicing as high as 90-something% that we're gotten to 60-something%. He's dropped our servicing,
debt
servicing cost, and also because we remove subsidies, there's higher revenue to be distributed across states. What's the implication of this as things not still drop for our markets, for real life?
That's what I was getting.
So there are two different things, but let me address the first one. So yes, our debt service to revenue ratio, which was at some point even over 100%, has been dropping. So what that basically means is that the amount of debt that we pay as a country compared to or in relation to the revenue that we earn, right? So if we earn 10 naira, we pay debt service of 9 naira, right? Which is what was happening. But over the last few months, it has reversed. So debt service to revenue ratio
like 6 naira.
Is about, so we have maybe 6 naira or 5 naira plus extra now and probably reducing. And now that does not directly lead to reduction in cost of goods and services. What it only does is that it means government has a bit more money
for capital.
For capital projects. Exactly. Which indirectly could lead to inflation. What would drop inflation is what economists tend to call base effects. So if you're because inflation is usually one period compared to another period. So if the base period is high, like last year was very high because inflation was very high, we don't expect it to be high this year. So the base period is very high compared to the current period, so inflation will drop. And then, like I said earlier, you're not going to see the sort of exchange rate movement we saw last year.
Make it base period.
So let's assume that the base period last year is 100, okay? And this year's base is 120. So it means inflation will be 20. 120 compared to 100, right? 20 difference. So imagine if the base year last year was 80, it would be 40, which means higher inflation, right? So, but because last year's base was high compared to other years, when you do the differential, the inflation will be lower. So that technically means, and when you have lower inflation because of that base effects, then that could lead to lower interest rates, because you see interest rates are very high now. So the CBN will see it and say, okay, because we want to be very serious with interest rates now, and want interest rates to follow inflation, now that we are seeing inflation going down, we too will reduce our interest rate. And then when they reduce their interest rate, this now affects every other thing in the economy, and then prices can start to go down. And it's already happening. We did a survey at Nairametrics in January, and we did see major food prices and other consumer household items prices go down. However, it was compared to December. So it tends to happen. January prices tends to fall compared to December. But the rate of drop was quite high. And we're like, okay.
Because I bought tomatoes, the bucket was 15,000. I bought it at 4,000.
Exactly.
So it was a bit too drastic.
So you're seeing that. So it's very likely that you could see that sustained all year round. So if it does, then I mean I think inflation rate will go down and Nigerians can breathe that sigh of relief.
You know, talking about
revenue. No, revenue has gone up too. Good point as well. Revenue has gone up. No, revenue has gone up. Surprisingly, 2023 we did collect slightly more revenue than budgeted for. 2024 as well, based on the most recent data, which was I think as at August, we're also collecting more revenue than budget. Though some people will say it's because of exchange rate too, because they increase the exchange rate, so the money just increased or is higher. There was a question you did ask about the refinery earlier on and whether we should just fix the prices.
Yeah, I was saying
of crude. Yeah.
of crude.
So for that, no. You know why? Because when you do that, you distort the market completely, and then
whose market?
You create.
The world market.
It's like it's another kind of subsidy. Though it's the one they call subsidized on the production level. But what happens is, think about it now. Let's assume you're doing crude, and the price of your crude, the cost of you producing is say $40 per barrel.
Okay.
And if you wanted to sell, because the international market is $75 per barrel.
Yeah.
For example. Then government now says, okay, because now we get the crude, right, and it's our own, sell it for $60 per barrel.
Locally.
Locally.
Locally,
$60 per barrel. Okay. So what now happens? What happens is that the guy who is doing the crude becomes inefficient because he's already guaranteed of his $20 margin plus that $25 that he's forgone. His government is going to pay him.
Wow.
Remember, so he starts to be inefficient from day one. Then what now happens is that because you know how it is in Nigeria now, government is the one. Some people now come back and say $5 from that 25. You know.
And that like a round tripping thing.
Exactly. So you start to see all sorts of stuff, and then new investors who want to come in won't come in as well. So what you do is just focus on competition. And increase output. If we increase the amount of crude that we produce as a country, then ultimately you just see prices come down because at the end of the day, you just realize, you know what, there's no point. There's just too much crude, and even going outside, there's nobody buying. Let's go and just reduce it. So that is a better way of going about it than just saying you want to reduce it directly.
The prices.
Okay,
So let me ask this
second
question. We've had exchange rate issues, and so far it's like the Naira is gaining a bit of strength and the dollar is falling. And now the skeptics are saying that, are you sure that the federal government isn't pumping money, dollars, just to give us that sense that Naira is gaining strength? And how long will this last? How feasible is this? How sustainable is this? Can we still hope that it will come down really low, or after a while they may not be able to put the dollars back in? So what's your take on this?
So if that is happening, then it's not sustainable, but I don't think that's happening. And I've heard that sound bites also, and I've had that argument with a few friends, and we haven't seen the data. And when we did ask the guys at the other side, that's the CBN, they also said no, they're not intervening the way that people think it's. So what's the way? So before the previous CBN, we did used to, like, the CBN will come in and pump in liquidity just so that they can drag prices artificially. Now let's remember that the CBN is also a player in a foreign market. The ultimate goal for any market is for the CBN not to intervene at all.
Okay.
But we're an emerging country, we're an emerging market, so we're not at that level yet where you say you will not intervene. So you have to once in a while pump in supply if you see market disconnections. What I think happened last week, and which some of our sources tell us, is there were some inflows that came in from foreign investors last week.
Okay.
And those inflows went towards buying treasury bills and OMO bills and some of the bonds that we sold last week. They were quite juicy in terms of the interest rate that they offered. And so when things like that do come in, people hear and they're like, oh, wait a minute, if this much money has come in, then prices would tend to go down or the Naira will strengthen. But I think it's short term. You're not going to see Naira just drop to 1-2 as some people are already saying, jump, it doesn't work like that. You would always see all these small up and down, which is normal. And let's also remember again that Donald Trump has just, increased tariff on some
Canada.
countries. So we've seen the US dollar gain strongly as at this morning, and most global currencies have fallen. And so that would ultimately have an effect on our own currency as well, because we all trade currencies in pairs. And so I think that will happen. Then there's also demand for imports. I think you're going to see a lot of imports happen from the Nigerian point of view this February. A lot of people who brought in inventory. Yeah, people who brought in inventory that are sold off in December and January will probably be, making new orders and all that. So that would impact. And then, like somebody said, that there's going to be FAC will be shared very soon. And you know what?
Yeah. So talking about imports, because I was just going to talk. I mean, we've been talking about crude here, a lot, and one thing that I feel we need to, as this present administration, I think is working on, is diversification of the economy. We usually just bring up agriculture, and we never see the impact, We've never heard of a particular year or particular 4 years where agriculture led the way. There were more exports, more production of food, and and then there's also local manufacturing that seems like it's there, or not there completely. So I just feel like when it comes to diversification, why has it been so difficult to do it here locally, especially with the agriculture and local manufacturing?
So the funny thing is that I think a lot of people misconstrue what diversification means in some of the contexts that they speak to it. So Nigeria has a diversified economy. Like, the largest subsector in the Nigerian economy is agriculture. Crop production, yes, that's the largest. Followed by trade, telecoms, oil and gas is even further down in terms of how diverse our economy is. And Nigerian economy is mostly service-based. It's more service-based than
manufacturing.
Than manufacturing. Manufacturing is the least. So in terms of being a diversified economy, it is. But what I think we lack from a diversification point of view is Nigeria's earnings, export earnings. So it's mostly crude, 90% or 80% of thereabout. So to your question, if I cannot realign any better, I think what we're not seeing is that all those subsectors are not operating at the level that they should be operating, and they're not growing at the level that they should be growing. And that's because of all the problems that we have in this country. Man, if you talk to manufacturers, they tell you ease of doing business is a huge problem. We've not been able to solve it despite all the good work that someone like the current Minister of Trade is doing. But we still haven't been able to crack that. You still have all these occasional shocks, like the exchange rate pressure of last year. Interest rate is high now. So all these things are affecting local businesses. So the game now is, with all these reforms that has happened, there really is no excuse, no reason why all these subsectors should not take off from this year. If they don't, then it's really a failure on the government's part, because if you've done all these reforms and Nigerians have taken off this pain, then you have to essentially allow your local I
have to run off because I only have a minute left. But you see, you kind of took me to where I want, because where's the part of the people? Because we always say government do policies, but it's one thing for you to do the policy.
To use the right
if Nigerians still have a very foreign taste, I say, I'd rather buy my foreign than actually produce locally. If we still have those things where there's only so much government can do. They can create the policy if this deep. The Nigerians don't respond to that policy, nothing's going to happen. So how is the government's fault all the time?
But you know what? It's not the people's fault. Think about it. Like, I go to the market. I go to a supermarket, I want to buy something. Two things that you look at as a human being. You look at the price and you look at the quality. And the brand. So, and quality is diverse. What you can consider as quality, I might not consider as quality.
It's still the foreign taste.
No, it doesn't. No, it's like that everywhere.
Because the quality, you're comparing quality based off
the
foreign taste that you have. Yeah.
We have to wrap up. We have to bring you back. Unfortunately, we run out of time. My director is in my ears. But thank you so much for coming. We enjoyed this session, and we hope we can bring you back, because we need these conversations at least once in a while to help Nigerians understand better. Because we need to touch on SMEs. We need to talk about job creation. There's so much to talk about. So we'll have to bring you back at some point. Thank you very much for coming.
A pleasure.
That is all we can take today. We're speaking with Ugo Dre. He's the CEO of Nairametrics, and he's been very, very supportive in helping us understand better about the economy. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.